They thought humans were weak. They thought we were primitives who had barely crawled out of our gravity well, desperate for acceptance among the stars. The Galactic Assembly saw our extended hand of diplomacy as submission, our peaceful overtures as proof of our inferiority. They were catastrophically wrong. For 3 years, Ambassador Sarah Chen had worked tirelessly to secure humanity's place in the cosmic community. She spoke their languages, learned their customs, and endured their condescension with grace that would have broken lesser souls. She believed in the dream of peaceful coexistence, of humanity taking its rightful place among the civilized species of the galaxy. The Assembly repaid her dedication with a public execution, broadcast across 1,000 worlds as a warning to any who would dare challenge their supremacy. They made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed humanity would mourn quietly, accept our place, and fade into obscurity. Instead, they awakened something that had slumbered since our species first looked up at the stars with hunger in our eyes. They reminded us why every predator on Earth learned to fear the persistence of the human hunt, why we conquered a world of creatures faster, stronger, and deadlier than ourselves. The galaxy is about to learn what happens when you corner the apex persistence predators of Terra. They wanted to send a message about humanity's place in their cosmos. Humanity is about to send one back. Written in fire across the void, in the wreckage of their fleets, and in the ashes of their arrogance. The message is simple: we are not your prey. We are your reckoning. The pristine halls of the Galactic Assembly Station gleamed with artificial light, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the faces of delegates from 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen walked with measured steps through the corridor, her human-made diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the flowing robes, chitinous armor, and energy fields that adorned the other species' representatives. Behind her, the soft footfalls of her small security detail echoed in the vast space, for humans among millions of alien beings. Sarah had requested this emergency session 3 days ago, after intercepting communications that suggested several Assembly member species were planning coordinated attacks on human colony worlds. The evidence was damning: encrypted transmissions, fleet movements, and supply line preparations that could only mean one thing: genocide. She clutched the data pad containing the proof, her knuckles white beneath her diplomatic gloves. Remember, she whispered to Captain Marcus Webb, her head of security, we're here to prevent a war, not start one. Webb's jaw tightened, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before he caught himself. The Assembly had strict rules about weapons in the diplomatic chambers, rules that every species except humans seemed to find easy to break when convenient. Yes, ma'am. But, if they try anything, they won't. Sarah's voice carried more confidence than she felt. This is a place of law and order. Civilized discourse. The massive doors to the Assembly chamber dilated open with a sound like rushing water. Inside, the amphitheater stretched upward for nearly a kilometer, with thousands of delegate pods arranged in concentric circles around the central speaking platform. Each pod was customized for its occupant's physiology: atmospheric bubbles for aquatic species, gravity wells for heavy worlders, and radiation shields for the energy beings that occasionally graced the Assembly with their presence. Sarah's breath caught as she entered. She had been here dozens of times over the past 3 years, but the sight never failed to humble her. This was the seat of galactic civilization, where decisions affecting trillions of beings were made through careful deliberation and democratic process. Or so she had believed. The speaker's platform rose from the floor as she approached, lifting her above the first ring of delegates. The Assembly's artificial intelligence, a vast network consciousness known as the Arbiter, materialized as a shifting pattern of light above the chamber. The Assembly recognizes Ambassador Sarah Chen of the Terran Republic, the Arbiter announced, its voice a harmonic blend of frequencies that could be understood by every species present. You have requested an emergency session regarding what you term credible threats to human colonies. Present your evidence. Sarah activated her datapad, and holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing star charts, communication intercepts, and fleet movements. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. 3 days ago, Terran intelligence intercepted these communications between the Zalithian Trade Consortium, the hegemony of Scar, and the Crystalline Collective. Murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates as the evidence played out before them. The intercepted messages were damning: discussions of the human problem, plans fort cleansing operations, and resource allocation for what could only be described as military campaigns against civilian targets. As you can see, Sarah continued, these communications detail coordinated strikes against our agricultural worlds in the Centauri system, our research stations in the Vega cluster, and our colonial settlements throughout the Outer Rim. We estimate civilian casualties would exceed 2 billion humans. The delegate pod of the Zilithian Trade Consortium pulsed with angry red light. Ambassador Kethmore, a being that resembled a massive jellyfish encased in a mechanical exoskeleton, extended pseudopods that crackled with bioelectric energy. These accusations are baseless, the creature declared, its voice a wet, bubbling sound that the translation systems rendered into standard Galactic. The humans present fabricated evidence to justify their own aggressive expansion. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had expected denials, but she had hoped the evidence would speak for itself. Ambassador Kethmore, the quantum signatures on these communications are verified. Our intelligence networks may be young compared to yours, but they are thorough. Young and paranoid, interjected the delegate from Scar, a reptilian being whose scales shifted color with emotion. The humans see threats where none exist because they cannot understand civilized interaction. They are a warrior species, barely removed from their primitive origins. The accusation stung, but Sarah maintained her composure. If we were truly a warrior species, Ambassador Zethkar, would we not have responded to these threats with force already? Instead, we come to you, seeking peaceful resolution through proper diplomatic channels. High above in the upper rings of the chamber, the most senior delegates, species that had been part of the assembly for millions of years, watched in silence. Sarah had rarely heard them speak during her time here, and their continued silence now filled her with dread. The Arbiter's light pattern shifted to a deeper blue. The evidence presented will be reviewed by the Intelligence Committee. Until that review is complete, this assembly cannot take action based on these allegations. Sarah's heart raced. The Intelligence Committee was dominated by species allied with the accused. The review could take months, and, by then, the attacks would have already begun. With respect, Arbiter, the time frame indicated in these communications suggests the attacks will begin within days. Surely emergency protocols. There are no emergency protocols for unverified intelligence from a junior member species, Kethmore interrupted, pseudopods writhing with satisfaction. The humans must learn patience. That's when Sarah noticed it, the subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The delegates weren't just dismissing her evidence, they were enjoying it. The slight curling of lips on humanoid species, the quickening of gill slits on aquatic ones, the brightening of photosynthetic panels on the plant-based delegates. They were amused. Captain Webb's voice crackled in her earpiece, barely audible over the chamber's noise dampeners. Ma'am, we're picking up energy signatures consistent with weapons charging. Multiple sources. Sarah's diplomatic training took over, even as fear clawed at her chest. Perhaps this assembly would benefit from a recess while the evidence is reviewed more thoroughly, she suggested, backing slowly toward the edge of the platform. Oh, but, Ambassador Chen, came a new voice, this one from the highest ring of the chamber. Sarah looked up to see the delegate of the cosmic hierarchy, an ancient species that resembled living crystal formations. We have already reviewed your evidence quite thoroughly. The holographic displays around the chamber shifted, showing new images of human military installations, fleet positions, and defensive capabilities. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what she was seeing. You see, the hierarchy delegate continued, we have been monitoring human expansion for some time. Your species' rapid reproduction rate, your aggressive terraforming projects, your military buildup all indicate a clear threat to galactic stability. Sarah's mouth went dry. Those are defensive measures. Our colonies are protected by minimal security forces, minimal by your standards, perhaps, Zethkar of Scar interjected. But, your minimal forces possess weapon technologies that could threaten established civilizations. Your species has progressed too quickly, learned too much in too short a time. The trap was springing closed around her, and, Sarah finally, understood. This wasn't about the evidence she had brought, it was about humanity itself. They had been planning this long before she arrived. Kethmore's exoskeleton hummed with power. The Galactic Assembly has concluded that humanity poses an existential threat to galactic peace. The intercepted communications ambassador Chen has presented are accurate because we wanted them to be intercepted. Sarah's security detail was moving now, forming a protective circle around the platform, but she could see energy barriers forming around them, trapping them in place. The chamber's defensive systems, meant to protect delegates from violence, had been turned against them. This is illegal under Assembly Charter, Sarah declared, her voice carrying across the chamber even as despair filled her heart. Diplomatic immunity applies only to recognized species, the hierarchy delegate cut her off. Effective immediately, humanity's membership in this assembly is revoked. You are no longer diplomats. You are criminals, conspirators in a plot against galactic security. The platform beneath Sarah's feet began to change, transforming from a speaking dais into something else entirely. Restraint fields snapped into place around her and her team, holding them motionless as the structure reconfigured itself into an execution platform. Captain Webb was shouting into his communicator, trying to reach their ship, but Sarah could see the energy readings on the chamber's displays. The UES Harmony, humanity's first interstellar diplomatic vessel, was being systematically destroyed by the station's defense grid. Her crew, 37 men and women who had volunteered for humanity's first diplomatic mission, were dying while she watched. The sentence for conspiracy against the assembly is death, the arbiter announced, its voice now cold and mechanical. The execution will be broadcast throughout assembly space as a warning to any who would threaten galactic stability. Sarah found her voice one last time, and, when she spoke, it wasn't as a diplomat but as a human being facing the end of everything she had worked for. You're making a mistake, she said, her words carried by the chamber's systems to every corner of the station and beyond. You think we're weak because we came seeking peace. You think we're primitives because we're young. But you've forgotten something important about humans. The execution mechanism was powering up, energy building and configurations designed to ensure maximum suffering for the entertainment of the assembled delegates. Sarah looked directly into the primary recording device that would broadcast her death across the galaxy. We remember our debts, she said. And we always pay them back with interest. The energy beam that killed Ambassador Sarah Chen was designed by the Assembly's most skilled executioners to cause maximum pain while extending the dying process for nearly 3 minutes. It was meant to serve as entertainment for the delegates and a warning to any species that might challenge the established order. Instead, as Sarah Chen's final scream echoed through the chamber and across the galaxy's communication networks, it became something else entirely, a war cry that would awaken humanity's oldest and most dangerous instincts. On Earth, in the halls of the Terran Defense Council, Admiral Elena Rodriguez watched the broadcast in horrified silence. Around her, the most powerful humans in the solar system sat in stunned disbelief as their hope for peaceful coexistence died along with their ambassador. Sir, came a voice from the communication station, we're receiving priority transmissions from all human colonies and military installations. They're requesting permission to begin immediate retaliation protocols. Admiral Rodriguez stood slowly, her hands trembling with rage that she fought to contain. For 3 years, humanity had played by the galaxy's rules, had accepted insults and condescension in the hope of earning respect through patience and diplomacy. No more. Send a message to all human forces, she ordered, her voice steady despite the fire in her eyes. Condition Omega is now in effect. We are at war. As the broadcast of Sarah Chen's execution reached the farthest human outposts, a change began to ripple through humanity's scattered children. The farmers on distant agricultural worlds looked up from their fields and remembered that their ancestors had once been warriors. The researchers in isolated laboratories sealed their most dangerous projects and prepared to weaponize everything they had learned. The miners in the asteroid belts loaded their industrial equipment with military precision and plotted intercept courses for alien supply lines. The galaxy had made its first mistake when it assumed humanity would accept genocide quietly. It was about to make its second mistake by underestimating what humans could become when they stopped pretending to be civilized. In the depths of space, automated systems began broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies, in every language known to humanity: Sarah Chen is dead. The war begins now. No mercy. No quarter. No survivors who stood by and watched. The age of human diplomacy was over. The age of human vengeance had begun. The emergency session of the Terran Defense Council convened in the deepest bunker beneath Geneva, 3 kilometers underground in a facility that had been built for humanity's darkest possibilities. The room was sparse, functional, and lined with enough quantum shielding to hide from any sensors the galaxy might possess. Around the circular table sat the 12 most powerful humans in existence, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of holographic displays showing humanity's scattered settlements across 47 star systems. Admiral Elena Rodriguez had not slept in the 36 hours since Sarah Chan's execution. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and rage as she surveyed the faces around the table: Fleet Admiral Chen Wei, Director of Colonial Defense Maria Santos, Intelligence Chief Alexander Volkov, and 9 others who held the fate of humanity in their hands. The initial reports are complete, Rodriguez began, her voice hoarse from hours of briefings. The aliens' coordinated strike has begun. Kepler 442b was hit 6 hours ago. Proxima Centauri C is under bombardment as we speak. We've lost contact with 14 colony worlds, and our deep space monitoring stations are detecting massive fleet movements throughout the galaxy. The holographic display shifted to show the carnage. Burning cities on worlds that humanity had spent decades terraforming. Ships fleeing into deep space carrying whatever civilians they could save. Agricultural platforms destroyed, taking with them the food supplies for millions of humans scattered across the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Chen Wei, a stern woman whose great-grandfather had been a general in the ancient Chinese military, spoke first. Our scattered fleet elements are conducting fighting retreats, but we're outnumbered 1,000 to 1. They've been planning this for years while we were playing diplomat. Casualties? Asked Director Santos, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer would be devastating. Rodriguez pulled up the numbers, each digit a dagger in her heart. Preliminary estimates suggest 200 million dead or missing. That number will climb as more colonies go dark. The room fell silent except for the hum of the bunker's life support systems. 200 million humans, more than had died in all of Earth's wars combined, snuffed out in a single coordinated strike by species that claimed to represent galactic civilization. Intelligence Chief Volkov leaned forward, his cybernetic implants glowing softly in the dim light. Half his face had been replaced with advanced processing equipment during humanity's early experiments with human AI integration, making him look more like a living computer than a man. The psychological analysis is complete. This wasn't just military action, it was intended as a demonstration of power. They want the surviving human populations to submit voluntarily. Like hell they do, growled General Patricia Hayes, the director of the Colonial Marine Corps. My people are already mobilizing. Every human world that survived the initial strike is preparing for ground combat. Rodriguez held up a hand for silence. Before we discuss military response, I need everyone to understand exactly what we're facing. The Galactic Assembly represents over 3,000 species across 50,000 star systems. Their combined military might includes technologies we can barely comprehend. If we choose to fight, this will not be a war, it will be an extinction event. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, humanity's leaders absorbed the mathematical certainty of their own destruction. Then, Director Santos spoke, her voice quiet but carrying absolute conviction. My daughter lived on Kepler 442b. She was a teacher in New Barcelona, working with refugee children from the outer colonies. The preliminary reports say the Zolithians used bioweapons on the civilian population, something that dissolves human nervous systems but leaves alien physiology intact. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. They didn't just kill her quickly. They made her suffer because she was human. Admiral Rodriguez felt something cold settle in her chest, not despair, but something far more dangerous. Around the table, she saw the same transformation happening in the others. The math didn't matter. The odds didn't matter. What mattered was that humanity's children were dying, and their killers had made the mistake of letting some humans live to remember. Intelligence assessment, Rodriguez ordered. What are our advantages? Volkov's cybernetic eye whirred as it accessed classified databases. Surprisingly, we have several. First, our technology advancement curve has been exponential compared to theirs. What we lack in refinement, we make up for in innovation and adaptability. Second, our industrial capacity is distributed across dozens of systems, making it difficult to eliminate completely. Third, and, most importantly, they've underestimated human psychological warfare capabilities. Explain that last point. The Galactic Assembly species evolved in stable environments with predictable threats. They understand conquest and subjugation, but they don't understand total war, the kind of warfare where there are no civilians, no rules, and no limits. Humans spent millennia perfecting those techniques. Fleet Admiral Chanwei nodded grimly. Our deep space reconnaissance drones have been mapping their logistics networks for 3 years. They have massive industrial capacity, but it's centralized and vulnerable. Their military doctrine assumes quick, decisive strikes followed by negotiated surrender. They don't understand persistence hunting, added General Hayes. They've never faced a species that will chase them across the galaxy for decades if necessary, picking off their assets one by one until nothing remains. Rodriguez felt a smile cross her lips, not a pleasant expression, but something predatory. What's our current military assessment? The human defense fleet consists of 47 capital ships, 300 cruisers, and approximately 2,000 smaller vessels, Chenwei reported. Against their numbers, it's nothing. But our ships were designed by engineers who grew up reading about David and Goliath. Every human vessel carries twice the firepower it should, along with enough redundancy to keep fighting after taking damage that would destroy alien equivalents. Industrial capacity? Director Santos activated her own display. 18 major shipyards, 43 manufacturing centers, and over 200 mining operations across human space. Most are automated and can switch to wartime production within hours. The advantage of being a young species is that all our infrastructure was built with conflict in mind. Our asteroid belt mining platforms alone could produce enough kinetic projectiles to glass a dozen worlds, added the Director of Resource Management. And that's using existing equipment. Give us 6 months of wartime production, and we can build things that will give their nightmares. Rodriguez felt the cold rage in her chest spreading, becoming something larger and more focused. Around the table, humanity's leaders were undergoing the same transformation. They were remembering what their species had been before it tried to become civilized. Psychological warfare assessment, she asked Volkov. Extensive. The assembly species have never encountered an adversary willing to accept mutual destruction as a viable outcome. Their entire social structure is based on hierarchy and submission. They cannot comprehend a species that would rather die fighting than lie kneeling. The cybernetic intelligence officer paused, accessing deeper files. More importantly, they've just provided us with the greatest recruitment tool in human history. The execution of Ambassador Chen, broadcast across every human settlement, has triggered what our xenopsychologists called tribal consolidation response. Every human, regardless of previous political affiliation, now considers themselves part of a single extended family under attack. Rodriguez nodded. She had seen the reports from across human space, colonial militias forming overnight, civilian populations volunteering for military service at unprecedented rates, and industrial workers logging 18-hour shifts to build weapons. The galaxy had intended to terrify humanity into submission. Instead, they had awakened something that had been dormant since humans last faced extinction on their homeworld. Final assessment, Rodriguez said. Can we win? The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, General Hayes spoke, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Define winning. Can we defeat the Galactic Assembly in conventional warfare? No. Can we make them regret ever having heard the word human? Absolutely. Rodriguez stood, and the others rose with her. Then, we are in agreement. As of this moment, the Terran Republic is at war with the Galactic Assembly. Our objective is not victory, it is to ensure that they never again mistake human kindness for human weakness. She activated the bunker's primary communication system, opening channels to every human military installation, colony world, and deep space outpost. Her image would appear on screens across 47 star systems, reaching every human being who had survived the initial attacks. Citizens of Terra and her colonies, Rodriguez began, her voice carrying across the void. 38 hours ago, Ambassador Sarah Chen and her diplomatic team were murdered by the Galactic Assembly while under diplomatic immunity. This act of barbarism was followed by coordinated attacks on our civilian populations, attacks that have claimed the lives of over 200 million of our brothers and sisters. The transmission was being monitored by alien intelligence services across the galaxy. Rodriguez wanted them to hear every word. The aliens believed that by killing our diplomat and slaughtering our civilians, they would terrify us into submission. They have made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. We are the species that turned wolves into companions, that climbed out of gravity wells using controlled explosions, that looked at the hostile void of space and decided to make it our home. Throughout human space, civilian populations gathered around communication screens. On military vessels, crews paused in their preparations for combat. In hidden bunkers and remote outposts, humans who had thought themselves forgotten remembered that they were part of something larger. We offered them our friendship, and they returned it with treachery. We extended our hand in peace, and they cut it off at the wrist. They have taught us that there can be no coexistence between humanity and the Galactic Assembly. Rodriguez paused, letting the words sink in. Therefore, as of this moment, we are at war. Not a war of conquest or expansion, but a war of survival. Our enemy has shown us that they will accept nothing less than our complete extinction, so we must give them nothing less than theirs. In the background, alarms began sounding as the bunker's defensive systems detected incoming signals, not attacks, but responses from across human space. Volunteer applications, resource commitments, and battle plans submitted by civilians who had never worn a uniform but understood that their species' survival was at stake. To every human listening to this broadcast, you are now a soldier in humanity's army. Your farm is now a supply depot. Your factory is now a weapons manufacturer. Your school is now a training facility. We will turn every human settlement into a fortress and every human citizen into a weapon. The display screens around the room showed real-time responses from across human space. Industrial output was already increasing exponentially as civilian infrastructure shifted to wartime production. Military recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. Most importantly, the scattered human populations were beginning to coordinate with a precision that impressed even their own leaders. To the aliens monitoring this transmission, you wanted to send us a message about our place in your galaxy. We received it. Now we're sending you one in return. Rodriguez's expression hardened, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a species that had conquered its own world through sheer bloody-minded persistence. We are coming for you. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. We will find every world you call home and turn it into a monument to human memory. We will hunt down every ship in your fleets and add its wreckage to our collection. We will pursue you across the galaxy until the last alien who participated in this genocide draws their final breath. The transmission was being recorded by alien intelligence services, but Rodriguez wanted them to understand exactly what they had awakened. You made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that because we sought peace, we had forgotten how to wage war. You forgot that humans are the apex persistence predators of Terra, a world where everything evolved to be faster, stronger, and more deadly than us, and yet we hunted them all into submission anyway. She leaned closer to the camera, and every human watching saw the face of their species' ancient fury made manifest. We are coming, and hell is coming with us. There will be no mercy. There will be no quarter. There will be no survivors among those who raised their hands in approval when Saracen died. The transmission ended, but its effects rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. In alien capitals, intelligence analysts played the recording for military leaders who had never seen such raw hatred in a sapient species. On human worlds, populations that had been cowering in fear began to remember what their ancestors had been capable of when their survival was threatened. The galaxy had wanted to terrify humanity into submission. Instead, they had reminded humans that they were the descendants of creatures who had stared into the abyss and decided to make it their home. The war was about to begin, and humanity was remembering why it had been the only species on Earth to dream of reaching the stars. The asteroid belt mining station Minerva 7 had been humanity's proudest industrial achievement before the war began. Built into a metallic asteroid 15 kilometers long, it housed 60,000 workers and their families in a complex network of tunnels and chambers that had been carved from solid iron and nickel. The station's massive fusion reactors powered industrial equipment capable of processing entire asteroids into refined materials, while its automated factories could produce everything from starship hull plating to medical supplies. Now, 3 weeks after Admiral Rodriguez's declaration of war, Minerva 7 had become something else entirely, humanity's first weapons factory dedicated to genocide. Commander Sarah Kim walked through the station's main industrial corridor, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck plating with each step. The familiar hum of mining equipment had been replaced by the shriek of fabrication units working at maximum capacity, producing ammunition, weapons components, and other implements of war that the galaxy had never seen before. Production report, she called to Chief Engineer Martinez, who stood before a bank of holographic displays showing the station's output in real time. Exceeding all projections, Commander, Martinez replied, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The entire crew had been working 18-hour shifts since the war began, sustained by stimulants and fury. We've completed the first batch of kinetic penetrator rounds. Each one carries enough energy to crack a continental plate when it hits at relativistic speeds. Kim nodded, studying the sleek projectiles being loaded into the station's mass drivers. They looked harmless enough, simple cylinders of tungsten and uranium wrapped in guidance systems, but, when accelerated to 90% of light speed, each one carried the destructive power of a nuclear weapon. The special projects, she asked. Martinez's expression darkened. Deck 7. Dr. Reeves is running the final tests now. Kim made her way through the station's corridors, passing workers who had transformed from civilian miners into military manufacturers overnight. The change in their demeanor was striking. Where once she had seen tired laborers counting the hours until their shifts ended, now she saw humans consumed with purpose, working with the focused intensity of people who knew their species' survival depended on their output. Deck 7 had been the station's experimental materials laboratory before the war. Now it housed Project Pandora, humanity's response to the bioweapons that had been used against their colonies. The airlock leading into the lab was marked with biohazard warnings in 17 languages, though Kim doubted any alien species would recognize the significance of human danger symbols. Dr. Elena Reeves looked up as Kim entered the laboratory's observation chamber. The scientist's eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights, but they burned with the same focused rage that had consumed every human who had seen the footage of Ambassador Chen's execution. Commander, Reeves said, gesturing to the containment units that lined the laboratory walls. I think you'll be pleased with our progress. Through the transparent aluminum barriers, Kim could see samples of biological matter that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The contents of each container were carefully labeled: Antizolithian pathogen Mark 7, Scar nervous system disruptor, crystalline collective dissolution agent. These will work? Kim asked, though she already knew the answer from the satisfaction in Reeves' voice. Better than work, they'll be elegant. We've analyzed biological samples from every major assembly species, courtesy of their diplomatic missions during peacetime. Each pathogen is specifically designed to target alien physiology while leaving human tissue completely unaffected. Reeves activated a holographic display showing cellular-level destruction in progress. The Zolithian variant attacks their bioelectric nervous systems, causing paralysis and, eventually death as their bodies lose the ability to regulate basic functions. The Scar version dissolves their calcium-based skeletal structure. The crystalline collective pathogen introduces resonance frequencies that shatter their silicon-based matrix at the molecular level. Kim watched the simulated destruction with professional interest. Delivery method? Atmospheric dispersal, water contamination, or direct contact. Once released, each pathogen is self-replicating and will spread throughout the target population within days. Conservative estimates suggest 95% mortality rates across all tested species. And the special request from Admiral Rodriguez? Reeves smiled, an expression that would have terrified any alien observer. The psychological warfare variant. It doesn't kill immediately. Instead, it causes gradual system failure over several weeks, during which the victim experiences increasing pain and debilitation. The suffering is extensive. Kim nodded approvingly. How long until we can begin production? The manufacturing systems are already calibrated. We can produce enough biological weapons to sterilize 100 worlds within the next month. As Kim left the laboratory, she reflected on how much humanity had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, she had been a mining administrator concerned with quotas and profit margins. Now she was overseeing the production of weapons designed to commit genocide on an unprecedented scale, and she felt nothing but satisfaction at the efficiency of her operation. The transformation had not been limited to Minerva 7. Across human space, similar changes were taking place as humanity's scattered populations embraced their new role as the galaxy's apex predators. On the agricultural world of New Eden, farms that had once produced food for peaceful trade were now growing biological agents designed to contaminate alien food supplies. The farming families who had once welcomed alien visitors to their harvest festivals were now engineering crop diseases that would cause massive famines on alien homeworlds. In the Vega Research Complex, scientists who had once sought to unlock the secrets of the universe were now focused on weaponizing everything they had learned about physics, biology, and engineering. Their laboratories produced weapons that violated several intergalactic treaties, devices that could cause stars to collapse, pathogens that could survive in the vacuum of space, and AI systems designed to hack into alien computer networks and cause maximum chaos. On the frontier mining worlds, human colonists were turning their industrial equipment into weapons of war. The same mass drivers used to launch processed or to other systems were now being calibrated to fire kinetic projectiles at alien military installations. Fusion reactors designed for peaceful energy production were being converted into the hearts of weapons that could crack planets. But, perhaps the most significant change was taking place in the heart of human space, in the military academies and training facilities where Earth's children were learning to become something their species had never needed before: professional exterminators. Captain James Mitchell stood before a class of new recruits in the Mars Military Academy's main lecture hall. The young men and women before him were volunteers who had signed up for military service in the days following Ambassador Chen's execution. They came from every corner of human space: farmers from agricultural worlds, engineers from industrial stations, even artists and teachers who had decided that their species' survival was more important than their personal pacifist beliefs. "Today we begin your education in genocide," Mitchell announced, his words echoing in the Stark Chamber. Not warfare as it has traditionally been practiced, but total destruction of enemy populations. The students listened with rapt attention. These were not professional soldiers learning advanced tactics, they were civilians being transformed into something that the galaxy had never encountered before. The traditional rules of warfare assume that both sides share common ground, that they are fighting over resources, territory, or political control. Our situation is different. The Galactic Assembly has declared its intention to exterminate our entire species. Therefore, our response must be proportional. Mitchell activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's political map, with human territories marked in blue and assembly worlds in red. The disparity in scale was overwhelming. Humanity controlled less than 1% of the galaxy's habitable worlds. In conventional military thinking, this would be an impossible situation. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Any rational species would surrender immediately. He paused, looking directly at his students. Fortunately, humans have never been accused of being rational. Quiet laughter rippled through the room, not the laughter of amusement, but the darker humor of people who had accepted that they might not survive the coming conflict. Our strategy is based on 3 principles, Mitchell continued. First, we make the cost of our extinction so high that they regret ever attacking us. Second, we ensure that their victory is meaningless by destroying everything they hope to gain. Third, we make certain that even if humanity dies, we take as many of them with us as possible. The display changed to show human military assets scattered throughout the galaxy: ships, installations, and weapon caches that had been secretly positioned during the years of peaceful diplomacy. For 3 years, while Ambassador Chen was negotiating treaties and trade agreements, our intelligence services were mapping every alien world, cataloging their weaknesses, and positioning assets for exactly this scenario. The aliens thought we were naive peacekeepers. In reality, we were gathering intelligence for the most comprehensive extermination campaign in galactic history. One of the students, a young woman who had lost her family in the Kepler 442b massacre, raised her hand. "Sir, what about alien civilians? Children?" Mitchell's expression didn't change. "What about human children on Kepler 442b? What about the families on Proxima Centauri C who were dissolved alive by Zilithian bioweapons?" The aliens made the rules of this war when they chose to target our non-combatants. He gestured to the display, which now showed casualty reports from the initial alien attacks. They have demonstrated that they do not distinguish between combatants and civilians. Neither will we. The student nodded, her expression hardening with the same transformation that was taking place across human space. The galaxy's brutality was teaching humanity to be brutal in return. Your first assignment, Mitchell announced, is to design a method for destroying an alien population center while ensuring maximum psychological impact on other enemy worlds. Remember, we are not trying to win battles, we are trying to make them afraid to continue this war. As the students began working on their assignments, Mitchell reflected on the magnitude of what humanity was preparing. In military academies across human space, similar classes were taking place. Young humans were being taught to think like exterminators, to plan campaigns of destruction that would dwarf anything in the galaxy's bloody history. The psychological transformation was nearly complete. A species that had once reached for the stars with hope and wonder was now preparing to paint those stars red with alien blood. The galaxy had wanted to teach humanity about its place in the cosmic order. Instead, they were about to learn what happened when apex persistence predators decided to stop pretending to be civilized. In the depths of space, automated probes launched from human industrial stations were already beginning their work. Each probe carried biological weapons, kinetic projectiles, and AI systems designed to infiltrate alien computer networks. They moved silently through the void, targeting the industrial and population centers that kept the Galactic Assembly's war machine functioning. The aliens had expected humanity to collapse within weeks of the initial attacks. Instead, they were about to discover that humans had been preparing for this war since the first diplomatic contact. Every handshake had been an opportunity to gather intelligence. Every trade agreement had been cover for positioning weapons. Every cultural exchange had been a chance to study alien weaknesses. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had been the only species on Earth to look at a planet full of creatures bigger, stronger, and faster than themselves and decide to hunt them all into extinction anyway. The war was moving into its second phase, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what total war actually meant. The hegemony of Scar's homeworld of Scar Prime had stood unconquered for over 8 million years. Its crystalline cities rose like spears of light from continents protected by energy shields that could deflect the impact of small asteroids. The planet's orbital defenses consisted of 3,000 automated weapon platforms, each one capable of destroying an entire invasion fleet. In the deepest archives of their civilization, the Scar kept records of every species that had ever challenged their supremacy, and every species that had been reduced to radioactive ash for their presumption. None of those records mentioned humans. Admiral Zethkar, Supreme Commander of the Scar military forces, stood in the primary command center of the orbital defense station Eternal Vigilance, watching the displays that showed peaceful space surrounding his homeworld. 6 weeks had passed since the humans had declared war on the Galactic Assembly, and intelligence reports suggested that humanity was collapsing faster than even the most optimistic projections had predicted. Human colonies were going dark across the galaxy, their populations either evacuated or destroyed by Assembly forces. The few human military units that had attempted resistance had been swept aside by superior alien technology and numbers. Most satisfying of all, intercepted human communications indicated massive internal conflict as their scattered populations blamed each other for the catastrophe that had befallen their species. Status report, Zethkar commanded, his scaled hide shifting to the deep blue of satisfaction. At over 4 meters tall, with razor-sharp claws and teeth designed for tearing flesh, he was an impressive representative of a species that had built its empire through millennia of conquest. All sectors report normal conditions, Admiral, replied his aide, a younger Scar whose scales still held the bright green of inexperience. The human refugees fleeing the outer systems are being processed according to Assembly directive. Survivors are being held for labor assignments or biological experimentation. Zethkar nodded approvingly. The humans had lasted longer than most species the Assembly had conquered, but the outcome had never been in doubt. Soon, the last human settlements would be reduced to ash, and the galaxy would return to its proper order. That was when the first proximity alarm began to sound. Report, Zethkar ordered, his scales shifting to the yellow of alert status. The sensor technician's claws clicked frantically across his control surfaces as he analyzed the incoming data. Admiral, we're detecting multiple objects on approach vectors from the outer system. Configuration suggests asteroid debris, but the trajectories are unusual. The main display zoomed in on the approaching objects, revealing what appeared to be chunks of metallic rock moving at incredible velocity towards Scar Prime. Zethkar's experienced eye noted that while they look like natural asteroids, their approach patterns were too precise to be coincidental. Kinetic projectiles, he concluded, though he kept his voice calm to avoid alarming his crew. The humans are attempting a last desperate strike. Activate planetary shields and prepare defensive fire. The Eternal Vigilance's weapon systems came online with the power of a small star, charging particles and focusing energy beams that could reduce entire mountains to vapor. Around the planet, 3,000 similar stations began tracking the incoming projectiles, their targeting systems locking onto objects that appeared to be nothing more than chunks of space debris. The first projectile reached the outer defense perimeter traveling at 87% of light speed. The Scar weapons that intercepted it were the finest defensive technology in the galaxy, capable of stopping anything from invasion fleets to rogue comets. They struck the incoming projectile with enough energy to level a city, and, for a moment, Zethkar thought they had succeeded in destroying it. Then, the explosion reached them. The kinetic energy released when the projectile disintegrated was equivalent to several nuclear weapons, but that wasn't what made Zethkar's blood run cold. As the shockwave passed through space, it carried with it clouds of microscopic particles that his sensors couldn't immediately identify. Within seconds, those particles had reached the outer orbital stations. "Admiral," the sensor technician reported, his voice rising in pitch as panic set in, "the particles appear to be some kind of biological agent. Stations 7 through 12 are reporting system failures." On the tactical display, Zethkar watched in growing horror as entire orbital platforms went dark. The biological weapon was spreading through their computer systems, somehow corrupting both organic and electronic components with equal efficiency. "Biological warfare against cybernetic systems," he muttered, then raised his voice. "All stations, implement emergency quarantine protocols. Nothing gets through the next defensive line." But, even as he gave the order, more projectiles were reaching the planet's defenses. Each one carried a different payload. Some released clouds of nanomachines designed to disassemble matter at the molecular level, others carried viruses engineered to attack Scar physiology specifically, and still others contained AI systems that began infiltrating the planet's computer networks the moment they made contact. The humans had not sent a conventional attack force. They had sent weapons specifically designed to exploit every weakness in Scar biology and technology, crafted with the precision that came from 3 years of careful study during diplomatic visits. "Sir," the communications officer reported, his scales now the deep red of terror, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "There is no human fleet," Zethkar snapped. "Our long-range sensors show empty space in all directions. The transmission is coming from inside the system, Admiral. Multiple sources." The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of a human face. The woman appeared to be middle-aged by their species standards, with the kind of calm expression that Zethkar associated with apex predators who knew they held absolute advantage over their prey. "This is Admiral Elena Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force," the human said, her voice carrying clearly through the command center's speakers. "I am addressing Zethkar, Supreme Commander of the Scar military, and the population of Scar Prime." Zethkar felt his scales shift to the mottled pattern of confusion. "How are you transmitting from inside our system?" Rodriguez smiled, an expression that showed far too many teeth for Zethkar's comfort. "We've been here for 3 weeks, Admiral. Our stealth technology is remarkably effective when we're not constrained by diplomatic considerations." The tactical display suddenly came alive with new contacts, dozens of human ships that had been invisible to Scar sensors, positioned throughout the system like a carefully laid trap. They weren't large vessels by galactic standards, but each one bristled with weapons that Zethkar didn't recognize. 6 weeks ago, Rodriguez continued, your species participated in the execution of Ambassador Sarah Chen, a woman whose only crime was attempting to prevent the genocide of her people. Today, you begin to pay for that mistake. The remaining orbital defense stations opened fire, their weapons reaching across space to strike the suddenly visible human ships. The beams and projectiles that would have destroyed any conventional vessel simply disappeared into what appeared to be empty space around the human fleet. Displacement shields, the sensor technician reported with growing panic. They're redirecting our weapons fire through dimensional rifts. Nothing we shoot at them is actually hitting their ships. Zethkar's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. The humans had developed technology that exceeded even the Assembly's most advanced sciences, and they had done it in the 3 years since first contact. You wanted to teach humanity about our place in the galaxy, Rodriguez continued, her image filling the command center's screens. You succeeded. We learned that there is no room in your cosmos for both our species and yours. The first human weapons reached Scar Prime's surface. They weren't the crude nuclear devices or kinetic projectiles that Zethkar had expected. Instead, they were carefully engineered biological agents that had been designed specifically for Scar physiology. They struck the planet's energy shields and passed through them as if they didn't exist, falling like gentle rain onto the continents below. Within minutes, the first reports began coming in from the surface. The biological agents were attacking the crystalline matrix that formed the foundation of Scar cities, causing their magnificent spires to crumble into dust. More terrifying still, the weapons were also targeting the Scar themselves, inducing rapid cellular decay that caused their scaled hides to dissolve while they remained conscious to experience every moment of their destruction. My God, the communications officer whispered, his voice carrying across the command center. They're not just attacking our cities, they're sterilizing the entire planet. Zethkar watched the tactical displays as green markers representing major population centers began winking out one by one. Each marker represented millions of Scar lives, and they were disappearing at a rate that suggested complete extinction within hours. Please, he transmitted to the human fleet, his pride finally breaking under the magnitude of the catastrophe unfolding before him. We surrender. Cease your attack. Rodriguez's expression didn't change. Surrender is not an option. You made that clear when you executed our ambassador. We will withdraw from human space immediately, Zethkar pleaded, his scales now showing the pure white of absolute terror. We will pay reparations. You will die, Rodriguez interrupted. All of you. Your species made the decision to threaten humanity with extinction. We have decided to respond in kind. The human attack continued with methodical precision. Biological weapons swept across Scar Prime's continents, leaving no living thing untouched. The few Scar ships that tried to escape the system were hunted down by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere, their crews offering no quarter and accepting no surrender. In the planet's deepest archives, emergency systems activated to preserve Scar civilization's greatest treasures. But, even though secure vaults were not safe, human nanomachines had infiltrated the planet's infrastructure, and they systematically destroyed every record, every work of art, and every trace of Scar culture they encountered. Why? Zethkar asked, his voice barely audible as he watched his homeworld die. Why are you destroying our history? Our art? Rodriguez leaned forward, and her eyes held the kind of cold fury that Zethkar had never seen in his sapient being. Because we want the galaxy to forget that your species ever existed. When this is over, there will be no trace of Scar civilization except for the warnings we'll leave in its place. The Eternal Vigilance was one of the last orbital stations to fall. As human weapons finally overwhelmed its defenses, Zethkar found himself floating in the wreckage of his command center, his body broken by the station's death throes but his mind still functioning long enough to witness the final moments of his species. Through the shattered viewports, he could see Scar Prime burning. The planet's oceans had turned the color of blood as the biological weapons completed their work, and the crystalline cities that had stood for millions of years were collapsing into dust clouds that would soon be all that remained of Scar civilization. Rodriguez's voice followed him into death. Let this be a message to any species monitoring this transmission. This is what happens when you threaten humanity with extinction. We don't just defend ourselves, we ensure that our enemies never again have the capability to threaten anyone. The destruction of Scar Prime was broadcast across the galaxy by human communication systems that had been hidden throughout assembly space during the years of diplomatic contact. The images of a planet being systematically sterilized reached alien capitals where military leaders had been celebrating humanity's imminent defeat. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had contributed ships to the anti-human coalition began withdrawing their forces, claiming urgent domestic concerns that required their attention. Others sent frantic diplomatic messages to human territories, desperately trying to distance themselves from the Assembly's genocidal policies. But the humans weren't interested in receiving diplomatic communications. They had moved beyond diplomacy 6 weeks ago, when Ambassador Chen died screaming in the Assembly chamber while alien delegates applauded her suffering. On the bridge of the human dreadnought Retribution, Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical displays showing the next phase of humanity's campaign. The destruction of Scar Prime had been a demonstration, a message to the galaxy about the price of threatening human extinction. Now the real war would begin. Across the galaxy, human stealth fleets were moving toward their targets, carrying weapons that violated every treaty and moral code that civilized species had agreed upon. They carried diseases designed to cause maximum suffering before death, nanomachines programmed to turn alien technology against its creators, and AI systems that would systematically hunt down every member of target species regardless of where they tried to hide. Admiral, her communications officer reported, were receiving surrender offers from 47 Assembly member species. They're requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations. Rodriguez studied the list of species attempting to surrender, cross-referencing it with intelligence reports about their participation in the attacks on human colonies. Several of them had contributed ships to the fleets that had bombarded human civilian populations. Others had provided biological weapons or logistical support for the genocide. Ignore them, she ordered. We're not accepting surrender from anyone who participated in the attacks on our colonies. Ma'am, that includes over 2,000 species across 12,000 star systems. Rodriguez turned to look at her officer, and he took an involuntary step backward when he saw the expression in her eyes. Then, we have our work cut out for us. The galaxy had taught humanity that there was no place for mercy among the stars. Now humanity was going to teach the galaxy why apex predators didn't need to be the biggest or strongest creatures in their environment, they just needed to be the most persistent, the most adaptable, and the most willing to do whatever was necessary to survive. The age of galactic assembly dominance was ending. The age of human supremacy was about to begin, written in fire and blood across a cosmos that would learn to fear the sound of human laughter echoing through the void. The central assembly station hung in the void like a dying star, its once magnificent crystalline spires dark and cold against the backdrop of empty space. 3 months had passed since the destruction of Scar Prime, and the greatest political structure in galactic history was collapsing under the weight of humanity's methodical extermination campaign. In the station's highest chamber, where once the Assembly's senior delegates had debated the fate of civilizations, now only a handful of beings remained. They represented the last major species still attempting to coordinate resistance against the human war machine, though their numbers had dwindled dramatically as world after world fell silent under humanity's systematic campaign of xenocide. The delegate from the cosmic hierarchy, her crystalline form flickering with the unstable energy of impending death, addressed the nearly empty chamber with a voice that cracked like breaking glass. The latest reports confirmed the destruction of the Zilithian homeworld. The bioweapon they used dissolved every living thing on the planet's surface, leaving the cities intact but completely lifeless. It was designed to preserve infrastructure while eliminating all biological traces of Zilithian civilization. Around the chamber, the few remaining delegates absorbed this news with the hollow numbness of beings who had watched their galaxy transform into a charnel house. The hegemony of Scar extinct. The Zilithian Trade Consortium extinct. The Crystalline Collective extinct. Over 300 species that had participated in the execution of Ambassador Chen were now nothing more than radioactive dust drifting through space. How many humans have we actually killed? Asked the delegate from the Maritime Alliance, his aquatic form suspended in a bubble of liquid that had turned murky with stress hormones. The Arbiter, its once mighty artificial intelligence now reduced to emergency power systems, materialized as a faint outline of light. Conservative estimates suggest approximately 50,000 human casualties across all theaters of conflict. The chamber fell silent. In 3 months of total war, the greatest military alliance in galactic history had managed to kill fewer humans than died in traffic accidents on their homeworld each year. Meanwhile, humanity had systematically exterminated over 300 entire species, sterilizing thousands of worlds with a precision and efficiency that defied comprehension. They're not fighting a war, the hierarchy delegate observed, her voice barely audible. They're conducting an extermination program. She was correct. Across the galaxy, human fleets moved with the methodical precision of pest control specialists, identifying target worlds, deploying species-specific biological weapons, and moving on to the next target without pausing to claim territory or establish occupation forces. They had no interest in conquest, only in ensuring that every species that had participated in Ambassador Chen's execution ceased to exist. The Maritime Alliance delegate's aquatic chamber began to cloud with panic pheromones. What about the species that are surrendering? Surely the humans will show mercy to those who withdraw from the conflict. No, came a new voice from the chamber's entrance. The delegates turned to see a figure that should have been impossible, a human, walking calmly through the station's security systems as if they didn't exist. Admiral Elena Rodriguez stepped into the chamber wearing a simple military uniform that bore no insignia of rank or nation. Behind her walked a small security detail of humans whose eyes held the flat, predatory gaze of apex killers who had moved beyond any possibility of mercy or remorse. Admiral Rodriguez, the hierarchy delegate said, her crystalline form brightening with what might have been hope. "You've come to negotiate?" Rodriguez looked around the chamber, studying the faces of beings who represented civilizations that had existed for millions of years before humanity first looked up at the stars. "I've come to deliver humanity's final terms." She activated a holographic projector, filling the chamber with images of human fleets positioning themselves around inhabited worlds throughout the galaxy. Thousands of worlds, representing hundreds of species that had contributed to the Galactic Assembly's war effort. Every species that participated in the vote to execute Ambassador Chen has been marked for extinction, Rodriguez announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Every species that provided ships, weapons, or logistical support for the attacks on human colonies has been marked for extinction. Every species that stood by and watched while our diplomat was murdered has been marked for extinction. The Maritime Alliance delegate's chamber began cycling fresh liquid as his stress response overwhelmed his biological systems. "Admiral, surely there must be room for negotiation. Many of our species were coerced into participation. Others had no choice but to follow assembly directives." Rodriguez's expression didn't change. "Ambassador Chen had no choice but to follow diplomatic protocol when she came here seeking peace. Your response was to execute her while the galaxy watched." "Our response is proportional." "Proportional," the hierarchy delegate's voice rose to a crystalline shriek. "You're committing genocide on a scale that dwarfs anything in galactic history." "Yes," Rodriguez agreed calmly. "And we're going to continue until every species that threatened humanity with extinction has been removed from the galaxy. This is what total war means." She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed real-time footage of human weapons in action. Biological agents that caused alien physiology to dissolve over the course of weeks, nanomachines that dismantled matter at the molecular level, and AI viruses that turned alien technology against its creators with devastating efficiency. "You wanted to teach us about our place in the cosmic order," Rodriguez continued. "Congratulations, you succeeded. We learned that there is no room in this galaxy for both humanity and the species that tried to exterminate us. The Arbiter's flickering form attempted to project authority it no longer possessed. This campaign violates every principle of civilized warfare. The Assembly calls upon you to honor the conventions of the Assembly is dead," Rodriguez interrupted. "It died when you executed our ambassador. What you see here are the last spasms of a political structure that committed suicide through its own cruelty." She turned to address each delegate directly. "Your species have three choices. First, you can continue fighting, in which case we will hunt you to extinction across every star system in the galaxy. Second, you can attempt to hide, in which case we will find you eventually and the extinction will simply take longer. Third, you can choose the manner of your species' death." The chamber fell silent except for the sound of failing life support systems. The greatest political structure in galactic history was being dissolved by a species that had been members for less than 4 years. "What do you mean by choosing the manner of our death?" the Maritime Alliance delegate asked, though his aquatic form was already beginning to show the physiological signs of complete despair. Rodriguez activated a new display showing human weapon capabilities. "Some of our biological agents cause death within hours, painful, but relatively quick. Others extend the dying process over months, causing maximum psychological trauma to observers. Some of our nanomachine swarms preserve consciousness during physical dissolution, allowing entire populations to experience their own atomic disassembly. The choice is yours. She paused, studying the faces of beings whose civilizations had existed since before Earth's sun had formed. Or you can choose the path that several species have already taken: voluntary extinction through controlled population reduction. Stop reproducing, manage your species' decline over a single generation, and we'll leave your worlds intact as monuments to what you once were. The hierarchy delegate's crystalline form began to resonate with the harmonic frequency of absolute terror. You're offering us the choice between genocide and suicide. I'm offering you the choice between dying screaming and dying with dignity, Rodriguez corrected. The dying part is not negotiable. Around the chamber, delegates began transmitting the human ultimatum to their homeworlds. Across the galaxy, species that had dominated local space for millions of years were faced with a choice that no civilization had ever confronted: how to die as a people while preserving some fragment of their dignity. Why? The Maritime Alliance delegate asked, his voice barely audible above the sound of his life support systems failing. Why not accept our surrender? Why continue this extermination when we pose no further threat? Rodriguez turned to look directly at him, and her eyes held depths of fury that had been building since the moment Ambassador Chen died screaming in this very chamber. Because you made the mistake of thinking that human kindness was human weakness. Because you assumed that our desire for peace meant we had forgotten how to wage war. Because when we extended our hand in friendship, you cut it off and expected us to thank you. She gestured to the holographic displays showing the ongoing extermination campaigns. Every human child will grow up in a galaxy where the species that murdered our diplomat no longer exist. Every human world will be surrounded by the ashes of civilizations that learn too late what happens when you threaten a persistence predator species with extinction. The delegate from the last remaining major species, the Transcendent Collective, beings of pure energy who had thought themselves immune to physical destruction, materialized in the chamber as a swirling vortex of light. Admiral Rodriguez, surely some species could be spared. The galaxy is large enough for no. Rodriguez's voice cut through the delegate's plea like a blade. The galaxy had room for humanity and everyone else until you decided that our extinction was necessary for your peace of mind. Now the galaxy will have room for humanity and whoever we decide deserves to share it with us. She activated one final display, showing the scope of humanity's expansion into formerly alien territory. Human ships were already establishing colonies on worlds that had been sterilized of their original inhabitants, while human research teams studied the ruins of alien civilizations for useful technology. In 50 years, children will learn about your species in history classes, assuming we decide your cultures are worth remembering, Rodriguez said. They'll study the Galactic Assembly as an example of what happens when civilizations become so comfortable with their power that they forget the fundamental law of survival. Which is, the Transcendent Collective asked. Rodriguez smiled, showing teeth that every remaining alien in the chamber found deeply unsettling. Never threaten a species that conquered its entire homeworld through persistence hunting. We are very, very good at following prey until it can run no further. The transmission ended as Rodriguez and her security detail simply vanished, leaving the alien delegates to contemplate their species' final choices. Throughout the chamber, beings who had once commanded the loyalty of trillions began the process of informing their homeworlds that their civilizations would end within the generation. Some species chose the quick death of biological weapons. Others opted for the slower dissolution of controlled population decline. A few attempted to hide in the galaxy's most remote regions, hoping that human persistence had limits. They were wrong. 6 months later, the Central Assembly Station was converted into a human military academy, where Earth's children learned about the galaxy their species now controlled. The station's great chamber, where Ambassador Sarah Chen had died, was preserved exactly as it had been on that day, serving as a permanent reminder of the price of underestimating human resolve. Above the chamber's entrance, carved in letters visible from space, humanity had inscribed a simple message in every language that had once been spoken by the galaxy's vanished civilizations: here died the last age of alien supremacy. Here began the age of human dominance. Here the galaxy learned that mercy is earned, not owed. Students would pause before that inscription and remember the lesson their species had learned in blood and fire, that kindness was not weakness, that diplomacy was not surrender, and that when pushed to the edge of extinction, humans became something that even the vast galaxy learned to fear. The age of the Galactic Assembly was over. The age of humanity had begun, forged in the fires of justified vengeance and tempered by the absolute determination of a species that had looked into the abyss and decided to make it their home. In the depths of space, automated monitoring systems continued their vigil, watching for any sign that the galaxy's vanished species might attempt to return. They would wait for millennia if necessary, because humans had learned the most important lesson of all: when you are the apex predator, a hunt never truly ends. The galaxy was quiet now, filled with human voices and human dreams. And, in that quietude, those who remained remembered why humanity had been the only species on Earth to look at a universe full of dangers and decide to conquer it anyway. The stars themselves had learned to fear the sound of human laughter echoing through the void.